My name is Niranjan. I want to tell you a story about a bomb blast that changed my life. I grew up in the country of Sri Lanka. I was part of a minority community, and it was a country that went through many civil unrests. My goal in life was to be successful. I had the opportunity to work with American Express as country manager, and it was a role that provided me everything that I thought was important in life. But one day, the 31st of January 1996, it was a Monday morning like any other day, and I went to work. But on that day, 4 men in a truck loaded with 450 pounds of explosive drove that truck into the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, which was just across the road from the American Express office.
The devastating terrorist attack on the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in Colombo.
The victims who died and were injured in the attack that took place on the 31st of January 1996.
I was seriously injured and I went through 23 surgeries, first in Sri Lanka, then Singapore, and then taken on to the United States for more surgery. God began speaking to my heart about His purpose and His plan for my life, and I surrendered my life to whatever it is that He would have for me. As I recovered, my role with American Express began to change. I had the opportunity to travel all across Asia, almost every week to one of these countries in Asia. God gave me the opportunity to speak to pastors and missionaries in these countries. And in those conversations, it became very clear of the desperate need that existed. First for the gospel, because there were so few people to take it to people that needed to hear. But there was also a desperate need because there was those that were serving there just needed encouragement and needed somebody to come alongside. So my dear friend, you may be a businessman, you may be involved in other areas of work, but I don't know what priorities you're pursuing in life. I don't know what's important to you. I don't want you to make the same mistake I made of having to wait for God to get your attention with a 450-pound explosive. I want to encourage you where you are today. There is a world outside, and particularly the world that I got to see all across Asia with 4.5 to 5 billion people. People that are lost, people that are without hope, and they're looking for someone that can bring the message of the gospel to them. It's a region that has great need, and I want to encourage you to just ask God to see what role He would have you play. What is it that He has called you to, so that you can come along, your pastor and others in your local church, and have a greater part and a greater focus with regards to the work of missions wherever God has placed you. Well, Pastor Kagan, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and it's good to be here among some friends, people that I've known, but also to be here and meet with others that I get to meet for the first time. It's just an exciting time that you get to have your World Impact Conference, and I love the fact that you don't call it a missions conference or a missions emphasis month, but you look at it as to how you can impact the world, because none of us want to underestimate what God can do in and through our lives, because it's not us, it's God that does what He desires to do as we make ourselves available. But as I have the opportunity to share God's word this afternoon, I also wanted to just maybe begin by sharing a little bit about the ministry that the Lord's just entrusted to us and brought many others on that journey. But Pastor Keegan asked if I would take a minute to share a little bit about our own experience about this card that you may have received and will be talked about through this month. Some call it the Faith Promise Commitment. You call it a Stewardship Commitment, a card. And the way I think about stewardship is that the Lord's put something in each of our hands. It's our time, it's our resources, but it's also our finances. And as was clearly explained, God doesn't call everyone to go, but we can all have a part in the work of missions. First in praying, committing a portion of your time to say, God, I am going to faithfully set time apart on a weekly basis, on a daily basis to pray. But the other area is through our giving, and by participating in giving towards the work of missions, what we do is we get represented on that field that you're giving towards by the person that God's called to go. So think about the way we thought about it as a couple. My wife Deirdre is over here. The way we thought about it was, look, yes, God is trying to do a great work, There is a need all across the world. But this was the beginning of an opportunity for us to start that journey, a journey of faith to say, God, I don't know how all my finances would come together, because even as it is, I'm struggling with trying to make ends meet. But by faith, I'm going to put a number on this card, and I'm going to trust you to provide, and I'm going to make this a priority in my life. We made that commitment, and I think I sat in a dangerous place when we first made that commitment. I sat next to my wife. So when these cards were given out, I kind of took some time to pray about it, and I carefully, did this like what we did in school, and I put a number down, and I didn't want Deirdre to see what I had written down. But she leaned over and she said, can you show me what you put down? And I showed her the card. And she thought a while and she said, why don't we double it? And I tried to explain to her, I said, Deirdre, you don't know what you're talking about. We're struggling even as is. But I just allowed her to direct what we did. We saw that here. We didn't miss a meal. God took care of everything that we needed and more. I'm not saying that that's the reason we gave, but that's how we found God to be faithful. And each year, we just, with a little more faith, increased what we gave, and God used that to increase in our hearts a burden for the world. That's where our burden for missions began. But the other was also through opportunity. Just your home is a home that God's given you to steward. When you do have opportunity, have a missionary come over, have somebody come over from a different country, and just inquire about that country and get interested country by country by country. And God may touch your heart to have a greater part in that work through prayer, through giving, or sometimes even by going. So that's what this is all about. It is what we get to have a part in as we impact the world. But this is also a personal journey for each one of us to see that God is faithful as we by faith put him to the test even in this area. Now on the back of the back there is a table which has some material about what I'm going to just share about. So I'm going to be very brief today. In there is a brochure like this. It's got every country in the 1040 region. And it's a good brochure for us to take, keep in our Bible, and make a commitment, whatever that commitment be, to say, God, I'm going to pray for one country a month, or I'm going to pray for one country a day, whatever that is, that's between you and the Lord. There's also a sheet like this with a QR code. It's got all of the information. But on the back of that, it's got also how you can partner in the work, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is. And it also has a bigger brochure with regards to what are some of the things that we're doing across the region. Feel free to grab it, and then if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer that. But if you get to the slides, just in April this year, we've been involved in the 1040 region through conferences that we've had across for the region. And we began back the journey began in 2009, when a group of about 20 men came together to pray for the 1040 region. I didn't know what the 1040 region was. I went there with my legal pad because I thought I was invited there to strategize how to reach the 1040 region. We did no such thing. There was a blind evangelist that was there, and he talked to us about our prayer life. And I began, at the end of those 3 days, recognizing that if God was going to do anything in my life, or through my life, or in a region, or in Mongolia, or in Mauritius, it's going to take God. He is the one that's going to do the work if we would allow him to. And that's what I learned right there in 2009. So we began praying about the 1040 region. And through that time, we began, as we organized those conferences, in the first year we had 350 people that came together from about 11 countries as we met in Singapore, inviting pastors and missionaries. And it's nothing, no credit to us. It is the Lord alone. Last year, when we met in the Philippines, we had in the evening services, we had 10,500 from 62 countries. But more than numbers, we've seen over 350 men and families surrender to go just like what we hear today, and serve wherever God called them. But as you saw in that video, my journey didn't begin there. We've gone through quite a few slides, I'm sorry. So that's just a couple more slides, if you don't mind. Just go back couple more. Just a couple more. Okay, just one more. Oh, sorry, right there, sorry. Yeah, that one. As I said, this was as I was starting to work, where we went through a riot in that country, and I saw my parents' home just burnt, the home that I grew up in destroyed. And I purposed in my life that if there was anything that I wanted, that was to be successful. That I wanted the success of this world, so I didn't have to go through that, or I didn't want my family to go through that. And then, as you saw there, in 1996, the next slide, please. Monday morning, just like any other day, and I saw what happened that day. It almost took my life, and providentially, God spared my life. And that began a journey. And God moved us to Singapore from Sri Lanka. And next slide, please. Just as you've seen, many of you are from this region. Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, China don't even believe in the existence of God. Parts of that region, ancestral worship. That's what that region is. But you look at some of the more affluent countries in Asia, like Singapore or Hong Kong, and you have families that have moved over there. One pursuit: educate children, have a good career, and pursue material comforts. That's what the region is. It's either everyone is pursuing something. And if you move to the next slide, that's what that region looks like. 5.4 billion people. Seems a big number, but each of them is like that little girl there. They have a name, they have a soul, and they're heading to either an eternal presence in a place called hell or in heaven. And where they end up is what we get to impact. And that's what this conference is all about. You saw, Deirdre, my wife, is here. Just like you, God brought our family out of Sri Lanka. But I'm thankful now that He's taken our son back there, who's serving there as a missionary, just a really good friend of the Mudley family. But he's serving there in an island of 22 million people, where I grew up. A vast majority of them lost. Now, if somebody has the opportunity to hear the gospel, and they choose not to accept that the message of the gospel, that's up to them. They made a conscious choice. But what if they end up in an eternity in hell because there's been nobody to tell them? I was in a country in Asia, and I was busy at the breakfast table in the restaurant, working on my computer, and there was a young lady that was walking around serving coffee. And she came over and asked if I would like some coffee. I politely said I would. And she poured the coffee, and out of courtesy, I didn't want to be disturbed because I was doing some work. I asked her whether she was a Christian or a Buddhist, and she said, I'm a Buddhist. I asked her if she had heard of Jesus Christ, and she said no. And I was happy to accept the answer. I was happy to get back to my work. And she paused for a while, and she said, I don't know, but could you tell me? I'll never forget that day. It just broke my heart as to, even after a 450 pound bomb, I was so focused on myself, while just across the table was somebody that could have ended up in an eternity in hell because of my own preoccupation. My dear friends, as we look at this region, look at that map. That country in red is just one part of the 1040 region. It's in fact one part of Asia. But in that region that is marked red live more people than all of those countries put together that are marked in blue. You can fit that little region into the United States. But it's more than the United States, South America, Europe, the region that we live in, all of these countries put together. And the video that you saw at the beginning, such a small labor force with very little resources to reach such a needy region. I was in business as vice president for American Express. As I traveled through countries, I would have people come through that work in these countries and to tell me, there is an opportunity here, there is a need here, there's a challenge here. And I do what any of you would have done. Get the right people in the room, put them in there and said, you're not leaving this room till you find the answers as to how we're going to take advantage of this opportunity or how we're going to deal with this problem. And it just breaks my heart if that's how we would deal with a simple thing like a business opportunity. How can we get comfortable that in our lifetime that a family member, a neighbor, a workmate, a schoolmate, a community, a country, a region will end up in a place called hell because people like me were just so caught up in our own world. That's what you see here. Next slide, please. So what we have been doing through Ministry Asia is doing just this, going around to churches and sharing this need and encouraging others to come along and partner with us in helping to reach this portion of the world through creating awareness, helping those that are serving. In many of these countries, I'm thankful that missionaries have trained nationals because it's only those nationals that can go to some of these places, hard places. But they need training, they need help. And that's what we're doing with local language resources. I saw that gentleman there with the Continue book. We're getting that book translated in a number of local languages so that they can use it and they can learn what it is to be a Christian and how they can grow. Next slide, please. Why do we do this? So that everyone in our lifetime can have at least one opportunity to hear the gospel. That's what World Impact Missions is all about. Next slide. How do we do this? First is, as I told you right at the beginning, I want to encourage you as a church, as individuals. What would God have you do? What you can do is say, God, I'm going to pray. I'm going to pray that some barriers and some walls will come down and people can hear. That's the first thing I would ask you to consider. And we've been doing this, next slide, just in many places. You see that slide right at the top there. Pastor Keegan, I think you're on that slide there with your dear brother Neil's there. Here was a group of men that met together. I don't know whether you can see it clearly, but they're holding a map of the world upside down. Because we truly believe if God could have turned the world upside down through 12 people, or 11, He can do it through this group. Don't underestimate what God can do in your life and through your life to change the world upside down, to turn the world upside down. Next slide. And so this is what we've been doing. Just in August this year, we had missionaries that are serving from all around this region come together in Cambodia to pray, saying, God, do something in my life. and then in my country where you call me to serve. Next slide. But in addition to getting people to pray, we're also trying to connect people. And we've done this in a number of countries. Next slide, please. We're going to have the conference again in Singapore, in the Philippines, from the 4th to the 6th of March next year. But moving along, next slide. Next slide, please. Here's where we have been able to bring missionaries, national pastors, and Bible college students together just in ministry workers in these last 4 months, actually, in Cambodia, in Laos, in Thailand, in Papua New Guinea, in Sri Lanka. And all we've done is we've brought them together into these rooms and said, look, what is your vision for Cambodia? What is your vision for Laos? And what do you need as help to be able to work towards that desire that God's putting on your heart? Next slide. So these are some of the meetings that we've had in Cambodia. These are the Asian missionaries I was telling about. Look at that. That's just Cambodia, just national pastors and missionaries in one country. For the first time together, getting on their knees and faces before God and saying, God, how do we pray for Cambodia that this can become a Christian nation? Next slide. This is Laos, a closed country, very restricted. They don't even put anything on social. But coming together and praying that God would allow them to start churches all over that map. This is Thailand. We had over 300 that came together there in that region just in the month of August. Next slide. This is Papua New Guinea. Missionaries and pastors that have been serving in that country for over 30, 40 years coming together, praying and saying, God, give us a burden for Papua New Guinea so that this can not only be a Christian nation in name, but that people know you as their personal Savior. Next slide. The next one's my favorite. It was in Sri Lanka. Neil was there with me, and we just had a wonderful time with a local church, just like this, or those involved in ministry, and saying, God, give us a burden for Colombo as a city. And Lord, what would you have us do? Next slide. But in addition to getting people to come on a journey of prayer, connecting people together, we've also are involved in supporting the work of the ministry in 3 areas: resources, local language. They don't speak English. And we need local language training material and resources. Next slide. I want to just take a minute to tell you about this group of people here. This is the Hmong community, M-U-N-G, Hmong community in Laos. If you go to the next slide, that's the way I had to get there. They told me it was a ferry, so I said, I'll come. But it's a board, and your car is on that as you go across. But that's where that church is. Witchcraft, drugs, daughters married at the age of 13, that's what their life has been. But thanks to a young man that was saved, trained, has gone out, all of those people there that you see in that building are saved. And out of that, next slide, this is the Bible Project, and I want to encourage you to think about this. All of us have a Bible, and many possibly in our hands, in our home. But many in this region do not have the copy of God's Word in their own local language. Some translations have not even begun. But what we are doing is raising finances so that we can get these Bibles into the hands of missionaries and national pastors so that they can get it to their people. God's just allowed us thus far 14 countries, 37 languages. Thus far, we've been able to purchase and give out 200,000 Bibles. But that's just such a small part of the need. Our desire is to be able to get 1.4 million Bibles in this phase into the hands of pastors and missionaries. It costs $5 a Bible, a cup of coffee. And so I want to encourage you to think about it. Maybe God would burden your heart to maybe even just reduce a cup of coffee or tea and then say, look, I want to just give $5 towards the Bible. Maybe that's all it takes. And then, but speak to Pastor Keegan. And maybe as a church, that's something that you may want to get behind. Next slide. As you're thinking about that Bible project, on your left side, the older gentleman there that you see at the bottom is a pastor. He was the pastor of the Phalam language in Myanmar. 16 years, he's translated the Bible from Burmese to the Phalam language. It's almost ready for print. March of next year, they've asked, can you help us with 5,000 Bibles to a population of 160,000 people? I don't know how, but we've said yes, by faith. But whilst we wait for that, they can print John and Romans now. It costs 70 US cents per copy. We're looking to print 10 to 15,000 and make that available now. Because as we spoke about earlier, we don't know when the rapture is going to be, when this whole opportunity is going to come to an end. But we have the opportunity right now. And we're saying we'd love to be able to do what we can to help. And that's true there. That's true in India, where we're printing John and Romans to be given. Now, next slide. So that's what we're doing. Resources, bringing pastors and national pastors together for training. We're looking to start that online also. But also financially supporting some of them that are going. God is calling men from Asia to go into Asia right now. There are 268 Asian missionaries that are currently either on the field or on deputation, as we heard explained, getting ready to go. 63 right now. We're praying for laborers. Many churches are praying for laborers. But we've got 63 that are ready to go. They're trying to raise support in a third world country, Philippines. And our desire is to see what we can do to help raise finances outside to get them to go. We said it costs national pastors. These are from that Hmong community I was telling you about. These men graduated 4 months ago, and they're starting a work in that community. You know what it costs to get them out? $200 a month. And we're saying we'd love to be able to raise that money so that you can go and tell your people as to how they can escape an eternity in hell. That's the opportunity that we have as we think about World Impact Month, to be able to get behind. Next slide. Next slide, please. So all of these are areas, and God may not call you to be involved in all of them, but we can partner in prayer. We can maybe partner in picking up a few Bibles and getting it out in a local language. Maybe we can partner in sending one national pastor out. Whatever it be, God's burdening your heart. You heard from somebody that's going back to their home country. Would love to be here, but is going back. How can we get behind helping them to go? We heard about Mongolia and the need there that's God put a burden on somebody else's heart. And you'll keep hearing from others that come through in this month. Whatever the Lord puts on your heart, get behind and trust Him to take you on a journey of faith. And that's what this card is all about. And that's what you'll get to be a part of. Next slide. So, next slide, please. The material at the back has the QR code. You can look at that. Pastor Keegan studied at West Coast Baptist College. We're thankful that we can take some of their curriculum and make it available free of charge to these national pastors. You can take advantage of that too. It's on there, it's free. Some good courses there. Just have a look at it, and if that's of interest, again, speak to Pastor Keegan, but the instructions right there. But I'd love for you, and I won't keep you long, I know it's a Sunday afternoon, just if you wouldn't mind, turn with me to the book of Exodus. Because all of this is great, but I believe as you're sitting here today, and as you think about this month, a question that God would have us consider, God, I see all of this, but where do I fit in all of this? And in Exodus chapter 3 is a story of, you can switch this off. Exodus chapter 3 is a story of a man by the name of Moses. And if I could paraphrase or just read a few verses from that chapter, Exodus chapter 3, verse 7, here's what it says. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people, which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows, and I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land into a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, and unto the place of the Canaanites. And the rest of the verse goes on. And it's a reminder of a portion where God is telling us, I have seen the sorrow, the suffering, the affliction that people are going through. And I can tell you that's what that region is all about, but that's what our region is all about. If you walk out of your home, you walk through the supermarkets and the malls and schools and the workplaces, you'll see people that are going through sorrow and affliction and difficulties, and you don't even know how they're going to get through that. But we're reminded here that God saw. But as God saw that, He was working from way before that in the life of a man. Moses should have died at birth. That was the king's decree, that every male child was to be killed. But God providentially spared Moses' life, just like He spared mine. I don't know why. And He spared your life. You're here because He's chosen to spare your life. But God had to take Moses out of a busy place, a palace. In fact, you would have thought that if there was any place that Moses could have been prepared for leadership, it's in the palace. With all of the fancy tutors that he could have had, and equipment that he could have had, and access that he could have had. But Moses was too busy, I guess. Just like we all can get too busy in our careers, in our homes, in the things that we're called to do. And God had to take him out of there into the back of a desert, because God had to teach Moses a lesson that we all need to learn. That if God is to use us to turn the world upside down, we've got to learn to be alone with Him. And that doesn't happen in a palace. That doesn't happen in busy places. But it happens in a prayer closet, in a private place, where we're willing to come and say, Lord, our church is going through a World Impact Month. We just get to hear all of these things about different countries. But God, what are you trying to do in my life? Or whatever you're trying to do, God, I'm available. And I just want you to speak to me through your word. And that's where the journey began for Moses. And when Moses had learned to be alone with God, God one day brought him on that walk where he passed that burning bush. And in fact, it's an interesting portion. If you read that verse, chapter 3, verse 4, it says, and when the Lord saw that he turned aside, that Moses had turned aside, and to see, then God calls him. Moses probably was taking that walk many times and had been preoccupied. But on this day, he was ready to stop and see something that God wanted to show him. I don't know what it is that God's trying to show you. But He wants you to stop. And He wants you to listen. Because that's going to be the beginning of your journey. And that's the journey that began there. And when God had finished with Moses, before that, Moses was able to save one Israelite from the Egyptian. But when God had finished that journey of preparation with Moses, God was able to use Moses to change the destiny of a nation. And that's what He can do in your life and in each one of our lives. Because together we can change the world. First of all, it's us decreasing and God having a greater preeminence in our life. That's the first thing. But the second is when we come together like this as a church, we can change the world because it's not us, it's Him. And when you get out of this place, you will see people who are living in a messed up world, who want to see their world changed from what it is today. But the question today is, are you willing to allow God to change your world so that He can use you to change somebody else's world? And that's what World Impact Missions is all about. I'm not going to belabor the message. God was able to use Moses. Moses had many excuses. If you read that, he says, God, who am I? I'm nothing. God, I don't even have the ability to speak. God, they will chase me. They're not even going to listen to me. And he makes 5 excuses here. And God patiently brings Moses on a journey of trusting Him, showing him that it's God that was going to do the work. And maybe you're here and you're making excuses and then say, God, I'm nothing. But I want to encourage you. If He could have used me, and He can use you. Because it's not me, it's not you, it's all about Him. And so I want to encourage you today as Pastor Keegan comes and finishes up our time together. Ask God what He would have you do and what decisions He would have you make with regards to your own personal life and your relationship with Him. And based on the commitments you make, somebody else may come to hear the gospel. Somebody else may get a Bible in their hand. Somebody else may have a missionary or a national pastor come to their village and hear the gospel for the first time. Pastor.